All right. Welcome everyone to the last session track for today, for first day of the Drupal Developer Days. Everybody welcome. We will talk today about Docker basics for Drupal developers. But first, let's take a look at our amazing sponsors, our diamond sponsors, platinum sponsors, and gold sponsors. Yeah, good job, guys. That's me. My name is Alex Milkowski. I am Drupal developer since 2010. I am from Ukraine and I currently live in Austria. And you can find me on drupal.org with nickname a.milkowski. And I work at Styria Digital Services. Let's start with the fun part. As a Drupal developer, at a developer conference. Drupal Developer Days is obviously a developer conference, and I think most of us here are developers or connected to developers, and we all know what usually developer want. Usually developer just want to, as me personally, just relaxed and pleasant coding. So I just want to sit at my own desk, or you can stand at your standing desk, or like this. We can lay on the beach and just code and just dive into the code without any interruption. But then suddenly comes something like project manager with new urgent changes, and you ask yourself, will I ever just be able to code? And now this Docker, after Vagrant and VirtualBox, there are always these interruptions. But we should always stay positive, and Docker can really make your developer life easier because it's intended to done for developers so that you can be able to focus on your code and on the development environment. And I'm personally, as I said, a developer. I'm not in DevOps or system administration. About half a year ago, I was working on a project when I had to set up my local environment, and I decided to change my previous workflows to Docker. I have tried it, and today I will share my experiences, what I have learned. I will tell you from a developer perspective what developer should know about Docker, which basics do you need to understand. Maybe as a developer you will not have to set up the entire Docker environment as I did, but at least if you work on some project where already Docker exists, you will understand how to use Docker, what is it made for. Maybe you will be able to fix some bugs. And if you will have to build your own Docker environment, I will help you how to start it. And by coincidence, there was today a Docker training. I didn't attend it, but could you please raise your hands if anybody attended Docker training workshop today? Cool. You have a good opportunity to repeat your knowledge, to refresh your knowledge, and maybe you will learn also something new from me today. And who already uses Docker in some projects? Or cool. Yeah, maybe I will also tell something new for you, but we will see. But I'm sure as a developer you have at least heard of Docker. But let's first start with a history. In the beginning of times, in the ancient times, we all used our local setup with LAMP, MAMP, or VAMP, depending on your operational system, like Linux, Macintosh, or Windows. We all were setting up our local Apache or Nginx. It all worked good, but with complex tasks like setting up locally Solr or Varnish, it always became a really hard task. And with multiple projects, you would have to switch PHP versions, Solr versions, and so on. It was always pain. And then people started to use virtual machines with tools like VirtualBox and with help of tools like Vagrant. It was also a good solution. But it was a bit of overhead for local development because for every project you would have to provision your local machines. It was also use of a lot of local resources, which is not really necessary. And now the next step, of course, those solutions number 1 and 2, they still exist, but you don't have to use them for all cases. And I think the better solution for this is Docker with Docker kind of plus. It's Docker with some extensions for Docker, which makes Docker easier. I will tell about them a bit later. But what is good with Docker is more lightweight, and you more focus on your application and not on managing your virtual machines. And it uses much less hardware and resources of your machine. And where can we use Docker? So first we can use it for our local development to simulate our production environment. We can run multiple instances for multiple projects locally, and we can configure different server setup with different software requirements. And of course we can use it on the server. You can use exactly the same Docker container which you have locally on the server if your production server supports Docker. But our production servers, they don't support these Docker Plus solutions, which I will explain later. On production, you always use the pure Docker, and if you're lucky, you use some extensions. But in these presentations, we will focus on local development. And I will talk from a perspective of a developer who develops website on his local machine. So first, when you start to research about Docker, you maybe go to Wikipedia and find this statement that Docker is a program that performs operating system level virtualization, also known as containerization. In simple words, Docker is software for building and running virtualized applications. And this containerization, again, I made it bold, it's an important term. In Docker, we have two subjects to talk. It's Docker images and Docker containers. They are separated for a reason. And so, but you will need to understand the difference. Let's have a look what Docker image is. Docker image tells you which software will you use in your application. It means which server do you need, like Apache or what, which PHP version do you need, which files do you need to copy where. So you just prepare your server to work. Then this Docker image is similar to, as I said here, is similar to a default operating system disk image. And it's defined by a file which is called a Dockerfile. It's a file with a special syntax, which I will show you later. And what is cool about these images that they're built once and can be used by multiple containers. And they are also extendable. You can build your image or use some image from another person and extend it with your own instructions on top of it, which was really hard to do with virtual machines before. And Docker containers, it's a next step. It's real applications which you start from these images. They are built from images, and you can start multiple containers from the same image, which makes this really cool. When you want to have multiple projects on your desktop and you want to use Nginx for all of them, you build image only once, and Docker is layered, so it can track what's already built, what's not already built, and it means it will build image for Nginx only once, and it will be used for all the containers, which will really speed up time of development, time of starting containers, and reduce the resources usage. So when you get started with Docker, you need to first install it. You do it by visiting the docker.com get Docker, and you have two options there. One is Docker Community Edition, one is Docker Enterprise Edition. What is interesting for us is obviously Community Edition. It's an open source version of Docker, and it's cross-platform. By this I mean it's supported by Linux, Mac, and Windows. And to verify if Docker works for you locally, you will need to use a terminal. Of course, there are UI tools for using Docker, but when you only learn Docker, I would recommend you to use always a terminal to control everything. So now we just run in terminal ---- version, so you verify which the Docker is installed, and then you will always find this example in many documentations. You do Docker run hello world. It's the first application which you run locally, and you can see that it did something already. So it tells that unable to find image hello world like latest locally, and then it tells that it pulls something from some library. So what actually happened here? This is the place where this hello world is stored. All these images, which I told you before, they are stored in image repositories. There are open public image repositories, like, for example, Dockerhub, which is the default one in Docker. And you can also use your private repositories or even local images. So on this Dockerhub, you can search for all these images and find some of which you need. And always on these pages, there are some instructions, what image can do, which commands do you need to use, and sometimes you get source code. These are the basic commands which you will first learn when you start to work with Docker. So first one, Docker run. We already saw it on the previous slide with the hello world. It starts a container from image, and it creates a container if it didn't exist before. So you do Docker run and image name. Docker stops, obviously stops the container by ID. Docker rm removes container by ID, and Docker PS, which is Docker processes, it shows you all the running containers which you have locally. It's really useful. You will use it often. And the next two commands I will show you in example in a demo later. This is how you log in into a container and how you build a container from image. So let's have a look on some demo. I will mirror screens right here. Cool. Yeah, so I have few demo examples for you. Let's first have a look on example number 1. Here we have an example of a Dockerfile. This is the minimum which you need for your Dockerfile. The first line is just a comment, and next line it's actually a command. It says from PHP 70 Apache. It means I am now creating my Dockerfile by extending another image, which I have previously found on the Docker Hub. So here it is. So I was looking for some PHP image, and usually everything which is with underscore is some there are public libraries from Docker developers. And here you can find some information what this image does, and then you see all these tags. These images, like in Git history, can be tagged with some version, with some branch of development, and they contain different software inside. So I was looking for Apache, and I have found that I need for that like 7.1 Apache or 7.0 Apache. So I have used this, and that's it. I have already wrote my first Docker image. I can build it. Here I have examples of some commands what we can do with it. For example, I can do I go to directory where my Dockerfile is, and I do Docker build. Then I say the name of my image, which how would I like to call it. For example, example 1. And then I tell space dot. It means where I would like to find my Dockerfile. It's in this directory. And my image is built, and I can use Docker command Docker images, and I see all the images which I have ever built on this machine, and one of them is example 1. Yeah, so we built an image, but let's start a container from this image. To start container, we know the command Docker run. And to run container, you usually need to specify more than just an image name. For example, if it's some web server, we will need to provide some ports, for example. So -d, it's interaction mode, and ports, we just need to verify, like, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4 maps to port 80. And then we can name our container with, for example, example1. And yeah, we need to then tell which image we would like to use. So we use example1 image. And sometimes you will see things like this. Image name, colon, and something. It's tag, which you use for image. The same as we used for PHP colon 7.0 Apache. So by default, it's latest tag. You can write it, or you can skip it. It will be by default latest. It already exists. I need to call it with a different name, like 1.1. And I have started my first Docker container. That's actually what I did, but what can we do with it? It already runs on my machine. Let's verify if it works. So let's try to execute some command inside this container. To execute command in container, there is command docker exec. -it is interactive mode of this. And we can, for example, I don't know, I need to, of course, I need to tell the container name. So our container name or ID we can find by command docker ps, which lists us all the active Docker containers. And then we can tell execute pwd command in the container, and it did it already. And if I want to log into container, I just run bash in the end. And now I'm inside my container. We can even already visit my container because it's Apache PHP in the browser. We just go to local host with our port ID. Oh, sorry, I obviously have started more than one container, I think. As usual, live demo not often works. Okay, let's skip this example, and I will show you when you're already logged in the container, you can already do whatever you would like here. For example, you would like to create a new file. And now I hope it will work. I know something with my computer locally. I will need to have a look. Let's keep it for now. Do you have any questions so far? So what we have done already, we have looked how to create your own image and how to start the container. Yes. Yeah. So you can think about it like it's like a virtual machine, but it's not exactly like works like a virtual machine, but it's like a virtual container which has inside already a Linux system with installed Apache and PHP. Yeah. So you have on your computer, like on my laptop, I have already like a small virtual machine inside which imitates a web server. Yeah. So it means I can copy Drupal inside of it, and I can already start Drupal in this container. Yeah. No, I see. No, it will have a different system. It will have the system which is defined in the image. I hope I will find a Dockerfile here. So we can see that they use Debian So you will use, you will have Debian inside. So you can also create your own image and tell, for example, you want to base from, I don't know, Ubuntu, yeah, or any other Linux distribution. But usually, as a Drupal developer, we are interested in Linux systems. Of course, you can start like a Microsoft Nano server or anything else. But usually, all the Drupal websites, they run on Linux servers. So yeah, we are always looking for images which use some Linux system. Yeah. In this case, it's Debian. Okay, let's go to the next example with a more complex Dockerfile. So I'm just showing you like examples, and I really think that you will not have to do all this on your own, because usually you will just use the ready-to-use Docker files, which are done by Drupal experts. So, but you really need to understand how to read these files at first. So you can also find, I have commented here a few lines. So there are really various commands which you can do a lot of stuff with these images. You can run your commands during the build time of image. Usually it's installing some packages. You can run commands when the image is just started. For example, you can, I don't know, start some composer install or something like this. But and you can set environment variables, you can copy files, you can log in with a different user, and here is a link to read even more examples. And here I just installed some PHP packages, and yeah, just copied some directories here and there just to show example how it could be done. And it can be even more complex like this. You can get arguments and so on. So these Docker files sometimes are really crazy. So for example, here I'm installing Drush and Composer, and it's actually not really heavy to read file, but sometimes people are doing really crazy things in these Docker images, which is really amazing. And it's just cool that you can already use it just by finding it on Docker Hub. So in the next example, I will show you a tool which is called for orchestration of your containers. As you saw previously, to start our container, we used already a long command, but sometimes you need to do more than just that. You will want to pass some environment variables inside, you want to map some folders and so on, and this Docker run can be really huge. And if you have like a microservice architecture with multiple containers, one for database, one for your search Solr server, one for Memcached, one for Apache, you will have many containers. And just to boot up your application locally, you will need to run like 5 different commands, and it makes then everything complex. And for this, there is an official tool from Docker which is called Docker Compose. It's like a next step of abstraction. In this file, you define only once how do you want to start your containers and what do you want to have inside. In this case, let's read the website from top. So here we defined, first of all, the version of Docker Compose. They have different syntax sometimes. So this is one of the most recent, 3.5. And then you have these services. Services are the containers. Actually, they should better call it containers, but it's called services. And we have here 2 containers. One is application, one is database. I just call it app, just like my name, which is I can just pick from my head. So let's have a look on database container because it's simpler. First of all, in every container, we define which image do we use for our container. So I just used MySQL 5.6 from Docker Hub. Then we often map ports. On the left side, always ports of my laptop, of my host machine, and on the right side, it's port of the MySQL. It's usually 3306. Then we can also set environment variables. If you open this image on Docker Hub, you will see documentation, and documentation will say if you want to set a custom password to MySQL, use environment variable MySQL root password. I did it, and my password is password. The next section is really, really important. It's called volumes. The thing is, all your files which you have in your container, they live in this virtual environment. And if you remove your container, all your files will just be deleted with container itself. It means if you develop a website, you start container, you remove them, start them again, you remove everything you did inside. For that, people map volumes from container on your host machine. So in this case, I have a special folder in my, I created a setup folder with name Docker runtime. People usually do it, just make a folder Docker runtime and put everything which need to be stored in Docker there. In this case, I map MySQL databases files here. It means when I will start my container new, I will have all my databases which I did before. And you can also, that was an example how you map directory. In this case, I mapped just one file, the configuration. Here, so I just override some memory settings for my database to be able to upload bigger files and work with bigger data than defaults. And the application server is a good example of how you make things more complex. So you can not only use existing images, but you can build images. So in this case, you don't use image commands, like we use for database, but you use build. In this case, I'm using my Dockerfile from the previous example number 3. And I pass some arguments which are required for that example. And there is another way how you can set your environment variables. One was like here. You just say every environment variable and value, key value pairs, or you can just create one file, put all your environments there, or variables there, and just include it once. It's good when you have like more than 10 environment variables. And here we have always also volumes mapping. That is really important for app server, because when I do a development, I usually use my local machine with PHP Storm here, where I can just use Xdebug and everything and just code in IDE. That means you don't have to log into container and use some Vim tools to edit your code files. No, you just map everything locally, and then I just tell dot. It means everything in this folder. It means absolutely everything what I have here will be available both on my machine and in the container. So my Drupal installation is in Dockroot. I have used Composer project for Drupal, and I have here just pure Drupal. Yeah, and here I map just one more file and ports. And let's start this application. I hope it will work better than previous example. So now I am here. I am in the same folder where my Docker Compose file is. And to start Docker Compose application, I just need to do this command, up, Docker Compose up, -d. It's always, when you want to start it with interaction mode. I will first start it with -d, and then I will remove it. You will see the difference. Sorry, it was in this wrong order. And now the Docker starts 2 containers, and it uses all my settings which I did. You're doing it only once, and then you can use it multiple times in your application. So for now, we are using only like basic setup, and we will always need to think about these ports. But there are extensions which allow you to have nice URLs in your browser. Yeah, so yeah, it worked. You can see that I can start installing Drupal. It means that I have locally a virtual machine where I have Debian with Apache and PHP. Then I have another container with MySQL, and I have it all in my Docker environment. And when I'm calling this page, it just calls my app server, and I can just use my Drupal as usual. And all your code is also available on my machine. It means I can edit anything here, and it will be changed there. So it just you're working on this as with a local website. That was all just basics. Of course, you can always extend and extend it. Let's continue with my presentation. The next thing, there are many, as I said, already created Docker Compose installations and Docker files which you just use. But to understand which one you need all these basics, so you will be able to read and understand what happens inside. So if you will need like Apache, you know how to write your own composer file for this, or how to find it. For example, this is this Docker for Drupal repository on GitHub. If you open it, you see that there is a Docker Compose file example. And if you read it through, you will see there are many commented things, for example, like Apache. If you uncomment this is like example what you do to install Apache, to use like Postgres database and so on. There are like varnished example Redis. There are already ready images which was developed here. And there are also many other repositories which you can use. And if you go to another level after you already learned all this, you can, or even you can already start from this, but I would anyway recommend first start with basics. There are things like, maybe you have heard of Dockerfile, Lando, and DDev. They are, I call them like already Docker Plus tools. They build on top of Docker Compose, on top of Docker files, and they have many things already integrated inside. If you don't want to care about how it works inside, you can already start with these tools. And they have like clean alias, they have good examples how to work with varnish, they have ready solutions for local Xdebug. So I would recommend to also check those ones but I would still recommend first to understand the basics, try stuff, and then dive into advanced stuff. That was it, and thank you for your attention. Yeah, questions, you're welcome. Oh, really? You're right. So I will repeat. Yes, you need to always check who is the maintainer of the Docker Hub image, because sometimes you may have a dangerous code inside. For example, I can show you, like in my profile, I have also published image which I'm using for me. It's for Drupal and base for Apache. And yeah, I didn't pass any security check. I just published it. It means anybody in the world can use it. And the same thing, other like hackers, they can do this. Yeah, so right. And just want to repeat myself one more time. If you find the one with underscore, it's official, published by Docker library. So they should be trusted always. Yep. Yeah, the Docker Compose and Docker, they're like two separate softwares. Docker is like a base, and Docker Compose is extension to Docker. And you can start any container with just a Docker, just like this. But to start your container, you will need to define everything you need in your container in one line. It's good. You can start your container, but you will need to always remember what to do. And Docker Compose is just an extension which helps you to do all this. For example, I have like a port, and Docker Compose has a different syntax. You just tell ports here, or like here, just with numbers. You tell it once, and next time you just do Docker Compose up, and it will start real Docker commands in background using your descriptions here. So difference is you need to how you start containers. In Docker Compose you define it in a file and do Docker Compose up. In Docker you do it in one command with multiple containers.
So it's a shortcut.
Yeah, it's a shortcut. It makes your life easier. I personally use only Docker Compose. I don't use any extensions like dev or Dockerfile. I will definitely check them out somewhere in future, but for me it's enough to use Docker Compose. Actually, I'm using something similar to this file in my projects. Yeah, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I mean, I don't support Docker. The question is how to use Docker on production, like in shortly. Docker and Docker Plus. So Docker Plus, I mean by Docker Plus, I mean these tools like this Dockerfile, Lando, DDEV. They are all done for local development, so you will not find them on production. Sometimes you will even not find Docker Compose on production. On production, people just use raw Docker. That's what the hosters do. And I personally know that majority of current production service maintainers, they all do something with Docker already. And many hosts and providers completely switch or provide many things in Docker, so it's really reliable. There are now running projects which work on Docker, so I would recommend to use it in production. What is cool also that you can use the same Docker image which you have locally in production. It means if you compile image and you have a container, you can use exactly the same container. You just copy it from production to local or vice versa. And risks? There are not much risks. Maybe for some hosters it's costs some resources to make this switch because it's infrastructure change, but there are not. I'm not aware of some risks which are specific to Docker. There are some generic risks on servers, but I don't know about some specific to Docker. Yep, just works. Yeah, go. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. That's actually the case for Docker. You have many software which you want to have locally, and you don't want to, or maybe you cannot, or you don't want to install it on your machine. You can just do it in your container. You can just put any software you want to, just test it, how it works together, remove, replace it. You can just play around it, and yeah, that's a good case for Docker containers. Sure, you just you can create it all in one container, or you can do this this microservices architecture. You define container for every service separately. And then you can just replace containers and the application will still run with other containers. So you will need to do something like this. For this, you will define all your applications here, all your containers, but with your software. Yeah, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, how do you decide how to separate containers on containers, what to include in your container, what to include in different container? My recommendation is to mirror what you have in production. If you have in production Docker containers, you just do exactly the same. If you don't have Docker containers, you try to have a look how your application is built. For example, if you're using like some Amazon, usually application with your server with PHP is like in one thing, MySQL is in different environment. So you try to imitate what you have in production. If you do not have any requirements, you just do have it compiled for yourself. Usually you just separate everything. So if it's Apache, you do it together with PHP. If it's Nginx, you can separate it on Nginx and PHP, FPM, and database is also separate. It's good because then you can easily replace something. For example, if you want to replace database with Postgres, you just replace one container. You don't have to change your entire image to now to support MySQL, and you need to rebuild everything in this case. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. That's actually a good question. How to deal with ports mapping, because sometimes ports can conflict with other ports. Even if you run the same container on your machine 3 times, you will have to change a port. That's right. So how am I dealing it personally? I do not have a lot of projects locally, and usually locally I don't work at the same time with like more than 4 projects at the same time. Usually others are just down, so if I want to start projects, I just start it and stop another one, because also the resources of machine locally is limited. But how I'm doing it, I have variables for these ports like this, and I have an environment file in gitignore. So every developer in my project has access to this file. And if he wants to start application on different ports, he just controls ports on himself. So then he wants to run, I don't know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so it's done like this. If you do not want to care about ports, you can just do something like this. In this case, Docker will create a random port for your container, and it controls ports mapping internally. But I wanted to, in this case, I wanted to show example how to use ports. And also for web servers, you need this port because you want to open it in browser. And it's easy if you remember this port always for this project, other than just go into Docker PS and look in which port was assigned to my container. And to advance this topic, there is also solution to run something like this, like Drupal.local, which is much nicer than seeing ports in your application. But it's not ideal. It is not shipped by Docker itself, but it's shipped by Docker extensions, which you can install manually. For example, I have installed locally an Nginx proxy for that. But other tools like, for example, Lando or Dockerfile, they have already solutions for that. They also start other Docker containers which map ports to your applications. But in this example, it's just basic. So I didn't provide that. Yeah, please.
I heard that Kubernetes is doing something with Docker, not with much understanding at my level. Do you consider it as also as a Docker source tool?
How? Could you please repeat how the Docker tool is called? Kubernetes? Kubernetes? I have never heard of it. But maybe. Like this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's even on docker.com. I don't know. I have never used it, so I cannot answer it. But obviously, yeah. See, there is even discussion what's the difference. But I don't know. Because as I said, I'm using just Docker and Docker Compose on the hardcore. Yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah, please. Yeah, right. You can do this, or if you have a local Apache locally, you can stop it or change it to different port. Yeah. Of course, if you have these ports, you will need to resolve it manually because every machine has different software. Like some may have Apache locally, some may have not. So you will need to always resolve it personally in your personal situation. There is no like. But there are like colleagues said, many ways like also reverse proxy away. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay. The presentation will be published, and you will get all these links here. Thank you for your attention.